The lockdown has been extended by another 2 weeks. Each week is costing the Indian economy almost 2 lakh crore rupees. And even this lockdown 3 with relaxations will not help economically because the major industrial and commercial hubs like Delhi, Ahmedabad, Pune, they are sort of, are completely in the red zones, and they are not going to have the required economic bandwidth to operate and be fully functional. I'm joined by Abheek Barua, the chief economist at HDFC Bank and a noted economist in India. Mr. Barua, in your assessment, how badly is the economy likely to be hit by this lockdown extension?
Well, it was pretty badly hit by the current lockdown, and my estimate would be that GDP growth, which is the principal measure that you use to assess economic impact, that would be down to around 1% for the entire year. So if you add another 2 weeks, perhaps with some relaxations and so forth, then you're sort of going down a little below 1%. So it's bad, and I think the problem is that we don't have too many fiscal buffers in place yet. I'm not even sure of how much we can really afford. So the more we extend the lockdown, the more we lose without really having an option of putting in place a large stimulus to offset the impact of this. So I'm a little concerned with the extension. Although I must say that I'm not entirely aware of what the various relaxations that come in this particular avatar of the lockdown imply in terms of industrial activity. But I think you raise the principal issue that the big sort of industrial producers happen to have the largest number of red zones. So you are keeping a very large section of the contributors to industrial production, GDP in general, out of the sort of production catchment as you go into this lockdown. So I don't know how much the relaxations, how much difference the relaxations would actually make.
There are the red zones, the green zones, and the orange zones that have now been identified by the government, where economic activity, implying that in the red zone, absolutely, no relaxations, and in the green zones, there will be certain relaxations for as far as this lockdown is concerned. But let me just ask you, what exactly is, would it not have been better if we had lifted the lockdown perhaps completely, except in the red zones? It's the lives versus livelihoods issues around here, and
Well,
that
yes
strikes me
and
as
no, in a
yeah,
sense that I think there is what we are facing is this very difficult trade-off
right.
between optimal health policy, which is to prevent the infection from really spiraling out of control, and the imperatives of getting the economy moving. And clearly, there is a huge, tussle or tension between the two objectives. So you take the simple case, which a lot of industries are complaining about, is that say you're a producer in a green zone, and some of your basic inputs come from the red zone. What do you do about it? So, what happens essentially in an integrated sort of industrial complex, which the Indian economy is, and just like the Indian market is an integrated market where the industrial complex is also integrated. And there, if you sort of leave out large chunks because of your containment strategy, then you do have a problem of not being able to have operational supply chains or delivery chains to the dealers and so forth in many critical areas of industrial activity. I really don't know what the solution to this is, except to really now focus on the red zones, ramp up testing exponentially, do a combination of isolation, sanitization to get the red zones into the orange category. I think that's and then ultimately to the green category. That's really the option that remains. The more long term perhaps option, and this is something that we have to work towards, and this is something that industry has been talking about, is to ultimately have some kind of a herd immunity in place where you essentially protect the people who are elderly or those with comorbidities, and let the younger people go back to work, possibly infect each other, but you will not have the kind of severe manifestations that you have in these vulnerable cases.
Fatality, right.
And then you kind of have a stable workforce. So I'm not. The problem that I have today is that the containment strategy does make sense at a certain level. You have the reds and the greens and the oranges, but I think we are not perhaps identifying a sort of an end game in terms of what we want to achieve over the next 3 or 4 months, because you cannot sort of have it's possible that an orange zone might turn red, and the green zone might move to orange. So if you have this constant kind of flux in the system, it doesn't bode well for industrial or economic activity in general. So I think while this is certainly something that needs to be followed in the short term, I think we need to have a longer term target in place. And this is what, countries like Sweden have done. I think, Germany has done partially, and accept the fact that you will have to live until you have an effective therapy or a vaccine in place. You have
Vaccine.
to aspire for herd immunity of some sort. And the herd immunity case is incidentally being made by a large section of Indian industry.
Right. The herd immunity case, of course, is being made by a large section of the Indian industry, and that, of course, is for the next 2 weeks at least. It's not coming into action. Maybe after that, it's both a demand as well as a supply shock, Mr. Barua, for the economy. Indians cannot spend because of social distancing, and the physical restrictions, of course, mean that factories are running at their lowest capacity. That is the stage as of now. How do we come out of this? Even, let's say when there is a graded relaxation right now, even when there is more of a relaxation, how do we get economic activity back? Is there a grand plan that the government can look at to get economic activity back on track? Is there one solution, one size fits all solution?
I don't think there is. And I think we have to accept the fact that we are moving to a new normal in many ways. And one of the facets of the new normal is that buyer behavior in general will change. There will be much more, precautionary savings. People will not want to spend on a lot of discretionary items. So I think we're looking at sort of some permanent shifts in demand patterns. So we have to perhaps accept the fact that we will not be able to get back on the growth path that we were on before the crisis hit us. But to the extent that some of the very obvious and fairly severe supply shortages exist, for instance, the credit shortage for the medium and small scale sectors, those are addressed comprehensively. And to the extent that we can provide income support to the more vulnerable sections of society, say a migrant worker who goes back home, doesn't want to come back to the city because of the rather torrid experience he's had with the lockdown. Can he be given a job? Can he be given some kind of income transfer through his Jan Dhan account? These are things that we need to talk about. But that being said, I think the problem here is that unlike the US or Japan or some of the European countries that have sort of gone ahead with very large stimulus packages, we simply don't have the space to spend too much in order to kind of stimulate or reflate the economy. And this
Right.
is, the wages of our past sins on the fiscal side, which has left us with rather fragile fiscal balances. So it's a tightrope walk in many senses of the metaphor. And let's see how it goes. But I am reasonably sure that the kind of things, the V-shaped recovery or whatever that a lot of people would hope for, I think is not going to happen. So I think even if there's a recovery, it's going to be sort of a long drawn process, and we are not going to see the kind of either income levels or growth that we had sort of gotten used to
Hope for
over the last
and
few
gotten
years.
used to. Right. I want to talk about the 1.7 lakh crore relief package announced by the finance ministry so far. That's the biggest and the only relief package that we've heard of so far. Do you think that relief package is enough to sort of get us out of this situation? Because
So,
there are, of
yeah.
course, as you said, the poorest of the poor, and who need to be, and the Jandhan accounts. And but there is also the case of the core sectors which are in a shamble right now.
So that was essentially a relief package, and even in terms of providing relief, I would think that it was sort of inadequate if you go by certain very basic measures of what would be an adequate income transfer. So I think that more needs to be done on that front. Then there is the issue of combining relief for certain sectors along with a stimulus, so that they not only sort of get back on their feet, but they have some expansion in their demand to look forward to. And for that, we need another round of fiscal support, which is not of the kind that we saw in the first package, of which is entirely sort of relief for people who had been suddenly thrown off balance by this entire lockdown business. But the next package has to be more focused on sectors that are getting completely decimated: hospitality, the aviation sector, and so
Aviation,
forth,
yeah.
and also look at other sectors where there can be a sort of a lingering effect of the lockdown. And I keep identifying the MSME, or the medium and small scale enterprises, because they've really been affected by the lockdown, very severely affected, and also because they tend to be fairly employment intensive. So if we are also sort of trying to sort of address the challenge of getting jobs back in the economy, that sector needs a lot of hand-holding from the government. But again, I would have to emphasize that this is all going to happen within a limited kind of fiscal arena,
Right,
because
right.
we simply don't have the money to spend our way out of the problem to the degree that a lot of our developed market peers have.
And my last question to you, I know you don't have much time, but thank you for sparing that much for us. My
Sure.
last question to you is about the migrants. The migrant labor, they are right now in the process of moving back, the migrants in various states and crisscrossing the country, going back to their respective hometowns and villages. One is hoping that at the end of these 2 weeks, there will be at least some semblance of relaxation of a lockdown and some economic activity, at least more than what is over the next going to be allowed over the next 2 weeks, will resume. Once these migrant laborers are back, how is this economic activity going to resume? Because that is going to be another challenge for the respective state governments and the central government to address, really.
Oh, absolutely. We are not short of challenges at this stage, and I think this is, another big problem that we need to handle deftly. Because I think the sort of natural human tendency for these workers who've, been through what I would call a trauma of some kind, would want to go back to the safety and the sort of social security of their own homes, and not want to come back to the cities because of the experience that they have gone through. So I think we need to a have more jobs which are focused in the rural areas. So you can think of the infrastructure projects, you can think of Manrega type of work that sort of complements agriculture, but also reach out and ensure that they get the message that urban jobs or industrial jobs in sort of urban areas and conurbations are still an attractive option, and what they went through just recently is unlikely to be repeated again. That's a very difficult challenge, and it involves sort of going against the very primary instincts of people, but that's something we'll have to handle very deftly.
Thank you, Mr. Barua. Thank you for your time. The words that I take back from what you're saying really are the economic impact is going to be huge. Difficulty, challenge, tightrope walk for both the central and the state governments. But let's see, what the next step is going to be. The lockdown extension is here, at least for the next 2 weeks. Let's at least hope that post these 2 weeks, there's some sort of more relaxations and in a more graded manner. Yes, certainly, because yeah, till the time there's a vaccine, there is some sort of solution to this medical pandemic which is upon us, medical crisis which is upon us, solution. But let's hope that the economic activity, which has already taken a big hit, at least as far as the actually not just the Indian economy but the world over, see some sort of normalcy returning to it. And thank you so much for your time. Keep coming back to Hindustan Times and for more updates about this pandemic, about its economic cost, about the lives versus livelihood debates, and everything else that goes with it. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you, sir.